Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Ivory, and you are tuned in to the Embracing Neurodiversity podcast, where I share my personal journey of embracing and enhancing the experience of my amazing son who is on the spectrum. Through this journey, I've discovered a lot about myself and continue to grow every day. My goal is to provide you with some useful insights and stories that will inspire you in your own parenting journey. Thank you for tuning in. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I am going to jump right in because this topic this week is one that is, I feel like actually most of the topics I discuss are not really popular or comfortable for the majority of population, but those who get it, those who understand who it's for, it's who it's for. But I've been thinking about a lot this whole idea of grieving, and when it comes to transforming your parenting, especially as it relates to raising a child on the spectrum, there must be actually a season of grief. And that season varies in terms of length per person. And quite frankly, there will be moments of grief that happen even after you have gone past the acceptance phase of the cycle of grief, and as it relates to raising a child on the spectrum. So today I want to talk about what it means to grieve when you have a child and you find out that they are on the autism spectrum. And I want to emphasize that I am a huge advocate of allowing yourself to grieve, and I want to encourage parents to embrace the grieving process. And I'd actually argue that you can't get to the phase of acceptance and embracing your child for who they are without allowing yourself to grieve, right? And not only is it important, but it is necessary to grieve. And I want to talk about why it is necessary to grieve. Not on this particular episode, but on another, I'm going to talk about why it's difficult for us to grieve. But today I want to talk about why it's important, in the hopes that you are encouraged to allow yourself moments of grief. As I talk about why it's important to grieve and to allow yourself to grieve, I want to attach it to this idea of the cycle of grief, right? And I want to attach it to the cycle of grief and how that cycle is actually a healing process as well, right? When we talk about grief, when we talk about the idea of grief and what it actually means to grieve, it is essentially like this idea that it's a natural reaction to loss. It's a natural reaction that human beings have to loss. That is what grief is, and it comes up in different forms for different people. It is pain, it is heartache, it is denial, it is reasoning with yourself, right? It is depression. Like it looks different for each person, and more times than not, all of those characteristics that I just explained show up in one person, and sometimes in one day or in the span of weeks, right? And that is why it's important to go through that process, because the more we suppress it, or let me step back, which is why it's important to allow ourselves to feel into grief, because that process is the natural way of us making sense of what is going on and what's happening. Oftentimes, as parents of children on the autism spectrum, we feel guilty about grieving, right? Because we believe that there is something attached to that means that we feel ashamed of our child, or we want to change our child, and that may not necessarily be true. And in those cases, even if that is the case, I think that it's important to acknowledge that so that you can unpack that and you can begin to undo the work of wanting your child to be different, because that is like that would be a fundamental error in really truly like embracing and allowing this process to be meaningful for you if you are wishing something is different. But the only way to get from wishing something was different to getting to a place of true acceptance is that arc of grief that comes with all of the character traits I mentioned in terms of anger and depression and denial. What I want to start with is the anger piece, right? I think that we are accustomed to, many of us, especially women, parents, moms, we are accustomed to suppressing our anger because it can be off-putting to others, or we don't want to make anyone feel comfortable. And when those feelings of anger come up, it is essential that you find safe spaces to let your anger out. Find a quiet, alone moments to let that anger out, whether it's screaming or crying, journaling the worst thoughts and feelings that's in your mind, right? That is how you are going to be able to cope with anger, is to release it, right? Or cope with your grief is to release the anger that comes up. That is easier said than done, but if you suppress your anger or pretend that it's not there, it's going to show up in other ways, in the way that we treat our bodies, in the way that we treat other people, in passive aggressive ways. And anger is very natural and very necessary for the grieving process in order to get to a place of acceptance, but we have to acknowledge it and let it take its course. In order for us not to project our anger upon other people, again, we want to go into our private spaces and expose and allow our anger. I've had plenty of moments of that where I am crying out in my alone time and I am expounding and expressing how angry I am about multiple things, including having to unlearn a lot of stigmas and relearn how to parent my son who is on the spectrum, right? So anger is a natural part of it. You have to embrace it, but do it in a private space where you can be authentic in yourself. Coaching also helps with that. Having someone that you can talk to and let your raw emotions come out with someone who you feel safe with, right? Number one, allowing that anger to take its course is going to be essential to get to the place where you are accepting. The other piece that comes out is the depression piece, right? And depression shows up differently for everybody. It could be overeating, over drinking, consuming drugs and alcohol more often than you probably should. It can come in sleeping a lot, not wanting to do anything for yourself, not wanting to be around other people. Like, only you know what that looks like. But again, it is also still a natural part of the grieving process that must happen. And you'll need moments where you can have, a day or two of feeling depressed, and then you choose to pull yourself out of it. But similar to anger, you don't want to suppress it. You don't want to pretend it's not there, because it's going to seep out in other ways, or perhaps it'll lay dormant and something will trigger it, right? This is a caveat, because really this is a conversation for parents so that they can become the best parent for their child and allow their relationship with their child and raising their child on the spectrum to transform who they are to be a best version of themselves. This conversation is for them, but a small caveat is that when you are suppressing anger and depression, it does show up in how you engage and interact and react to your child. If you recall from a few previous podcasts that I've done, I mentioned that how it's important to stay even keeled, because when you're raising a child on the spectrum emotionally, depending on the child, they can take you on a roller coaster ride if you allow it. It's important for you to have emotional even keel, not too high, not too low for the most part. And to be able, just as we're teaching our children to regulate their emotions, to be able to regulate your own. But the only way that you can do that is similar to your child. If you create safe spaces to be a mess, to be angry and to be depressed and have moments like that in privacy, in safe spaces with others who you trust and you get support from, and allowing space for that, and then choosing to pull yourself out of it after a couple of days. Don't allow yourself to stay in that space, right? and allowing that depression to take its course, because it's almost like a wound, a scab that you've gotten from a fall, and it needs to heal. But in order for it to heal, it's going to hurt really bad in the beginning, and then it's going to grow a little bit of a covering to heal the skin, which is where those raw emotions come up at too. So I say all that to say that allowing those raw emotions of anger and depression to be and to linger for a little bit, just to give you a sense of what it means to be human, is essential. It is super essential, as long as it's done in a way where you are not being reactive, but you are recognizing when those emotions are happening, and then you're creating spaces to allow yourself to feel those emotions. I've said it a million times, I'll say it again. In order to allow those emotions to take its place, you need a support system. If you have children, you need to have someone who you can trust to keep your child, so you can have that alone time to do those things, to feel those feelings and to process how you are experiencing your feelings. But that is another phase, that depression piece. But it's okay that you're experiencing it, and it's necessary to allow yourself to experience it, as it is a part of the grieving process. A part of grieving is surrendering. And in surrendering, I was reading recently, you are opening up a new world for yourself of opportunities and experiences that you probably didn't think could happen or imagine what happened for yourself. And again, it's this whole idea of understanding and believing that things happen for me and not to me. And pain is not avoidable, but when you get on the journey of surrendering, which is letting go of any expectations that you have had for yourself. Dreams and goals are essential, but expectations for how those dreams and goals should come about can stifle you. And also, when things don't go the way that you imagined it, the surrender piece reminds you that even this is for my good, right? Grief is surrendering. Within grief is anger and depression, which is essential to get into a place of acceptance, right? And so once we get to that place of acceptance, as I mentioned earlier, you will still have moments of grief because you are still in the healing process. Life essentially is an ongoing journey of finding healing and acceptance for all things, including raising your child who is on the spectrum. A part of the reason why we grieve is because for many of us, in learning that we were going to have a beautiful child, we begin to create these images and stories in our minds of the type of child we were going to have and the type of parents we were going to be. And what happens is, when we find out our child is on the spectrum, or any other way that your child comes into this world, that is in direct opposition to what you imagine in your mind, you have to grieve that. You have to grieve what you thought would be, and of that grief, it will open your eyes up to what actually is, which in many ways, what actually is way more purposeful, way more powerful, way more meaningful if you allow it to be. So an example of that is, for me, when I found out I was going to have a son, I had so many thoughts in my mind of who I wanted him to be in the world and how I wanted him to show up. And I wanted him to be this verbose reader by the age of 4. Like, I wanted to raise him to have a space where he could always be his authentic self. I didn't want to put parameters around it, but it was really big on me that he was highly intelligent and that he was intellectual, because I knew that was going to be his ticket in the world, right? And with finding out that he had autism and that his speech was delayed and his social skills were not up to par with other kids his age, I had to rethink what being intelligent looked like and unlearn a lot of the ways in which it showed up, which, quite frankly, for me wasn't that hard, because I've taught so many kids and there's multiple intelligence and shows up in different ways. So I had to grieve that old thought process of what I imagine my son to be, and then embrace what he actually was. And in actuality, when I allowed myself to grieve it, I was able to view the myriad of ways in which he is absolutely intelligent, and then celebrate that. And so that is what I want you all to know today, is that if you are grieving your child's diagnosis, if you just learned of your child's diagnosis and you are grieving it, that is okay. It's okay. You should, you must, it's necessary. It's a part of the process. And in grieving it, it pushes you forward towards acceptance. It opens your eyes up to seeing things in anew and allows you to surrender to the process, right? I'm going to stop there. I really am grateful for everybody who supports. I am always available for those who need support and coaching and someone to talk through this with, because it is very complex and sometimes you need someone who can relate. So I'm here for that. And until next week, where I will unpack why it's hard for us to grieve, I hope you have a great week. Bye.